And he didn't say, we live in a society. I waited 4 hours to see the meme, and I didn't get it.
Well, apparently he ad-libbed it. Well, no shit.
Yeah, no. You tell me they didn't actually write that? Honestly, I kind of believe that they wrote that for a second.
But yeah,
so did I.
With that.
Welcome to Idiot Block, a comedic podcast critiquing, discussing, and analyzing the media industry through reviews, debates, and historical deep dives.
Hello, welcome to a very special episode of Idiot Plot. I'm David Yanish, and joining me, as always, are Alex Overdahl.
I'm just here so I won't get fined.
And Justin Neitzel.
I'm Batman.
On today's episode, after years of waiting, petitions, and campaigns from fans, the wait's over, and Zack Snyder's Justice League is officially out. And to talk about this movie with us today, we have a very special guest, our resident friend group, Zack Snyder super fan, Geoff Pritzl, is joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
And we're going to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about the hashtag Snyder Cut campaign, the movie itself, and what this means for the future of both director's cuts and DC movies. With that, we're going to go straight into talking about the movie itself. So, Justice League was originally released in November of 2017. It tanked at the box office. It made lots of money, it just didn't make a profit. There was lots of behind-the-scenes issues that we didn't really hear about until after the fact, and we still don't really know the full story. What we do know is that at some point, Zack Snyder left the movie during post-production and was replaced by Joss Whedon, who reshot large parts of it and re-edited most of what was already filmed into what became the theatrical cut. And then I think after a couple years, or even like right afterwards, people started to figure out that the movie we got wasn't really at all the movie that was originally supposed to come out. And so people were talking and kind of trying to see, could we get Snyder's original vision out there? And eventually, after years of petitioning Warner Brothers, it actually happened. Now on HBO Max, you can watch it now. So I want to open up today's discussion with the first question, which I want to ask you guys. Did you think we would actually see this movie released?
No way. No. Absolutely. I thought there was absolutely zero chance. I think we made jokes about it too. So, oops.
Yeah. Well, I didn't think so. Oh, go ahead, Jess.
Nope. Go.
I was gonna say I don't think so either. And you think of how many things start as like a campaign on Reddit, and it's funny to joke about, and it's funny to talk about on Twitter, but to actually see something like that come to fruition, and I think to go over as well as it has is astonishing.
So you're gonna say, Justin?
I'm just saying, it's like I did not in my wildest dreams. I mean, typically studios dig their heels in and are like, no, we were right. You don't know what we saw.
It's the same studio that replaced him. I most likely intentionally replaced him. So it's strange to think. Sometimes it's like there's a lot of interference, and then later it was the same director who finished it, so they released the cut. This is like Zack Snyder isn't even the one who finished the movie, and they still ended up releasing that cut. I thought it was ridiculous to expect it, but it happened.
Well, and that's a good point, Alex, is that I don't think we still really know why Zack Snyder left the movie. What they've been saying is he left after the death of his daughter. But we've been also hearing that might not have been the case, that he might not have chosen to leave. He might have been forced out months before it was actually announced that he was forced out. I believe that only because we look at how much Joss Whedon did. They announced he left in June. The movie came out that November. I don't think there's any way that he could have reshot and redid all of what he did in that amount of time. Yeah,
it would have been impossible. It definitely had to have happened before, because a lot of it is the same script, but he reshot a ton of it.
Several scenes.
Yeah.
And to get all of them together.
Yeah, he basically reshot almost the entire movie in some way, shape, or form. Which Solo did that too. But it's a very rare thing for reshoots to be that extensive, especially.
Well, I think DC has another great example of that in Suicide Squad, right? That was
true.
Something that Warner Brothers kind of stepped in and said is too dark, and they ended up reshooting a very large percentage of that movie.
But didn't David Ayer direct those reshoots though?
He did, so they at least kept the same director.
Okay.
But it was still reshoots for, I think they said, around 50% of the movie.
And I think a big question with this specific movie is how much of Snyder's cut was actually complete. And it sounds like from how much they spent to get this movie out is $70 million, not a lot.
But honestly, after watching it, like, I think it might have been more, because I feel like all of that money was spent on the epilogue, which is the last 20 minutes, or at least a good portion of that money was spent on that. I feel like more of it was finished than I was actually expecting.
That's a good
I
point.
actually kind of agree with Alex too, considering you and me watched the Whedon version, and it's basically the same story. Just Whedon went and reshot a couple things and put more jokes in.
Yeah. No, Jeff, you have seen the theatrical cut, correct?
Correct, yeah.
When you watched it, because I know you studied Snyder's work. I remember when we first met, or close to that, is when you bought like a complete set of like Sucker Punch like beanies.
Yeah, from the original movie release, yeah.
And don't you have like a crew bag too or something?
Yeah, I've got like they have like a satchel or whatever.
Okay. But point is, you're a Snyder fan. When you saw the theatrical cut, could you tell it really wasn't his movie, even though it was his name on there?
I think so, and I think part of that is just knowing kind of Joss Whedon as well. There's stuff, and it's not that Zack Snyder doesn't have a sense of humor, but I think his movies tend to be pretty serious and dark, and so you could tell at least in my mind where you're watching something that was kind of shot by Zack, and then all of a sudden we get like a Joss Whedon joke in there, so I think that had a lot of mixed vibes.
Well, that's the other thing is Snyder has a sense of humor, but what the jokes in there were clearly not his style of humor that he usually has.
Mm-hmm.
He could never have Batman say something's bleeding. No.
Not even a Batman line you'd hear in a comic book.
No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you watch the Snyder cut, you see, especially with like Ezra Miller, they did a lot of funny stuff with Flash and stuff. So it's not like there weren't jokes in there, but I just Whedon has a very particular humor style, and
that's not
I think
very
that
good.
contrasts. It just contrasts very heavily with Snyder's.
There are two very distinct ways to be unfunny.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and with Whedon stuff too, like Whedon added all like the really random red clouds in the climax. He added the weird Russian family. He changed the complete opening because the opening in the Whedon version is honestly different. Like it's night and day. I mean, it's a lot more, I think, jokey, a lot more exciting. Whereas Snyder's cut is very somber
and very slow-mo.
Very slow. It's actually that's a very like typical Zack Snyder thing. I mean, you look at all of his movies, they all have very long intros, lots of explaining. They're all really long movies with a lot of explanation, and so seeing that as an intro for the Snyder cut does not surprise me at all.
Yeah, I was just hoping that he wouldn't be as self-indulgent with it.
And I understand that. I mean, because I thought to an extent, we're already meeting Steppenwolf and stuff's already happening, and we haven't even finished character intros yet at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I know watching it, Alex, I think that was your biggest issue.
That was, I harped on that a few times. Like the first act ends, and then the second half of the first act begins at the same time as Act 2. Like, they're still doing like Act 1 character introductions in the second act. It's like, I thought we were past this.
And then more introductions and more introductions.
Well,
this movie's all about the introduction.
Well, I guess my big issue with the whole way he introduces characters is there's two big things that really upset me. It's the fact that Aquaman is basically introduced twice.
Yeah.
He has two introduction scenes that sort of are his intro, and they're spaced out like 30 minutes apart too. which really doesn't help. But that was really bizarre to me. And the first one, it's Bruce Wayne talking to Aquaman, and then Aquaman leaves like he always does, which is he turns, faces whoever he's talking to, puts his hands up in the air, and just like walks into water, which he does like 3 or 4 times in the movie. And then there's weird like Swedish like wailing music.
That was another thing I was weird about this movie, is all of a sudden slow-mo, and we get to this over emotional song.
It's really bizarre. And the other issue I have with introductions is that one of the Snyder's big points with this movie, talking about and kind of hyping it up, is that Cyborg was going to be the emotional core, and he's not introduced into this movie until like an hour in. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand, like you can't say he's the lead but not really bring him in until after the plot has already began, I think.
Yeah, he should have been the first one then. Mm-hmm. I should have done all that stuff and then he runs into the Justice League or something. Like the pacing is just so off. It does feel like it's trying to do multiple different movies at the same time.
Or with that, you try to make it like Infinity War, where you make it his movie.
Yeah. So you're supposed to get 3 of them.
So I want to talk about, because we talked about like early story stuff. I want to talk about, which I think is the big elephant in the room with this movie, and that is the aspect ratio. I mean, you can't talk about this movie and not bring up the fact that it's shot in 4:3.
I mean,
it's released in 4:3.
The first frame you see when you start the movie, it's like, this movie is in 4:3 because Zack Snyder wanted it that way. Your TV is not broken.
The fact that it has to warn you that there's nothing wrong with the streaming service or your TV. The movie is just made that way because it was built so that your grandmother's tube TV could have the greatest viewing experience possible.
I thought it looked amazing.
In 420p.
It's like I'm watching a movie from the early 2000s off a DVD.
Well, and what's interesting is, like, there are reasons to shoot in 4:3, but this also wants to think it's an epic, like this grand, big experience. You don't shoot that in 4:3.
Especially considering half the action scenes, you feel like you're missing something.
Well, David, I know I had talked about it with you when I was initially watching the Snyder Cut. I don't know if I didn't get that warning or if I just wasn't paying attention and missed it. I actually Googled, like, is there something wrong? Like, am I supposed to see the Snyder Cut in 4:3? And there was an article about how it was because Zack Snyder had done a mix of 4:3 and 16, or the 2.39:1, I think, or 16:9 in Batman vs. Superman, and he wanted to have a consistent aspect ratio, and it also had something to do with the cameras he was shooting on. I believe it was to fill IMAX.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. It was shot for IMAX in mind, which is kind of ironic now, and that's never going to be released in IMAX.
Yeah.
And
unless someone breaks into an IMAX.
Which is funny, but you think of when this was shot though too, and it's funny that is still a relevant factor to that. How the industry has changed in a very short amount of time.
Well, I've seen films shot in IMAX that aren't shot in 4:3. He shot specifically because if you've been to an IMAX theater, they're kind of box shaped. And so I think wanted to fill that box shape. It didn't work, especially, I don't think it works with his style, because I saw an interview with Kevin Smith for the launch of this, and he talked about, well, this is weird, because Kevin Smith was kind of telling Zack Snyder how Zack Snyder made his movies. It was kind of bizarre to watch, but Kevin Smith brought up that Snyder shoots in splash panels, which if you don't read comics, which most of you probably don't, that's that big epic 2-page spread that becomes like the t-shirt that weirdos have. It's that epic 2-page big battle scene, that big heroic pose, and that's how Snyder shoots movies. And I don't think you get that grand sense of epicness when you have it shot in 4:3.
No.
Especially no, Geoff. Like I said, like we've said, you've studied Snyder's style. I know when you've shot stuff either with me or on your own projects. I think Snyder and Larry Fong, I think you kind of use their style. Did you think that shooting with 4:3, do you think that was a good move for him? Do you think that fit his style at all? Like, what are your specific thoughts on that?
I think for Snyder, I think it was a little unusual. I guess I understand the aspect for IMAX, and at the time when this was shot, because of how long it took to get the Snyder cut out. I understand that at the time IMAX was far more relevant than it is now. But I still think it's a little weird. I think Snyder relies very heavily on being able to show like these grand things. You look at things like 300 and Sucker Punch, and it's really about showing a whole lot of the frame. And so with something like this, I did think it was a little unusual. I mean, I guess it didn't bother me as much as maybe it bothered some other people. But I understand why people felt weird about it.
I mean, I understand wanting to try it and do it for IMAX, but it's like IMAX theaters are few and far between. So had we gone to the regular movie theater and watched this, would we be like missing half our screen on each side? Because I don't automatically be like, okay, let's go talk to the people running this place because something's wrong. Was there planning on having a disclaimer in front of that movie too?
I also think, honestly, if you watch it, like either it's really just that bad of a fit for this kind of movie, but some of the shots, it feels like we're definitely not shot with 4:3 in mind.
Definitely
like
not.
I keep thinking about some of the character scenes, and then like the helicopter one where it's like supposed to be a wide shot of a helicopter, but you only see the body.
Well, that's actually a great point that I was just going to bring up too. I mean, you look at stuff that's kind of akin to this. You look at a lot of the stuff that Marvel has done, and it's it definitely feels weird. I'm not talking about the conversation pieces, but when they're driving around in the Batmobile to fight off the demons in the final like one of the final battle scenes, that felt weird to me being in 4:3.
Well, it's just weird because some scenes you can kind of tell he shot it that way, and like Ovidal said, there's scenes that are definitely not supposed to be that way. So it's like, how are you inconsistent in doing this?
Well, especially because some of the scenes, it's like someone's hand, but like the hand's out of the focus, their face is in focus, but their face isn't fully in frame. Like there's lots of bizarre instances of that, and the fact that like the first 30 minutes of this movie is made up almost entirely of establishing shots that look really bad when they're in 4:3.
Just look bad in general too, considering they kind of looked CGI and fake. And it's just like, can you not go to a location and just shoot?
Honestly, that was a big problem for me, like watching, is how much of it was CGI. Like I know, like progressively, Snyder started to use more CG, but even like BVS, everybody complained that the finale was all CG, but the rest of it at least had some practical stuff. I feel like this whole movie was like the end of BVS, where it's just entirely green screen, and it looked bad.
And Zack Snyder does tend to shoot on green screen.
I mean, you look at behind the scenes of this movie, you see it's nothing but green screen around him.
Zack has always been a very big green screen guy. I mean, you look at all of his stuff lately. I mean, 300 was a lot of that. Sucker Punch was a whole ton of green screen. I think that's just how Zack has always shot stuff.
And that's
an interesting
fine.
point to that. Right?
And that's fine, but that's how this movie cost $300 million, because you're building sets in a computer.
Yeah.
Because there's not not much more action in this movie than there is in the theatrical cut. That was really weird to me. It's just the overuse of CGI, which I think is a good thing to talk about, because there's lots to do with that. So I want to bring up, I think, a very important question, which is, since the film was so heavy on CGI, this is a two-part question. One, all of us can answer. The other one, only a few of us can answer. Because Alex, for clarity's sake, Alex has not seen the theatrical cut.
So you can't judge me for having made up my mind beforehand.
Yeah, of this movie. I
just liked it all on my own.
I've seen it. I hated it. I think, Justin, you were right there with me.
Yep.
You just weren't as angry about it attacking people in public as I was.
In hallways.
No, I got angry with people who were trying to defend it. That was about it.
But that said, so the first question is do you think the CGI in this movie, overall, the CGI look, the visual look, do you think it looked bad?
Yes.
It looked really, really bad. Because I feel like I've kind of become the resident. I have, talked about epics and talked about not liking overuse of CG. This to me was one of the clearest examples of like what happens when everything is CG and how bad it can look.
Nothing looked real.
Cheeky. Yeah. Even the real stuff you're questioning, is this real? Because they like messed with it. Like these people's faces, like, is that real? Did they like add CG to this person's face? A lot of like the de-aging stuff and like the flashback fight scene. I don't know if anything was real or if that was just entirely made in the computer.
And nothing more apparent than that is when you look at Cyborg. I mean, he's completely CGI except his floating head, and it's like you can see it. It's like mocap his ass and have him do it that way. It at least would look better because you get more facial reactions and.
I think if you're looking for an interesting example as a counterpoint, and I'm not trying to spur a whole nother discussion because I know we could on this one, but The Force Awakens, there was a very specific piece. I know. I even thought about that bringing this up. There's a very specific piece where J.J. Abrams talks about how he really wanted to keep with practical effects because he thinks it provides a sense of realness for people. And then you watch The Force Awakens, and I know that they used some CGI and they mixed some characters with practical and CGI. But I think if you look at the alien races that they had and all sorts of stuff and the sets that they built, I think he's right. I think having these practical effects does really provide a sense of realness to the Star Wars world, and so to have a superhero world, and especially to have a strong comparison in Marvel, to go to DC where it is very heavily CGI'd, is that something that DC is going to chase, or it to be different? Or?
So how do you think that this movie then looked specifically itself, Geoff?
I'm sorry, what was your question?
What do you think about the CGI in this movie, though? So are you saying that you wish there was more practical effects in this?
I mean, having seen all the stuff in the recent years and even prior DC films, I mean, I do wish that there had been a little bit more practical effects. It's not like they're not capable of building a Batmobile. I mean, we've seen The Dark Knight. We know how that looks.
Oh gosh.
Well, even comparing it to say. The prequel trilogy of Star Wars, that looks more real than this movie did.
Yeah, which ironically, those were like maligned for overusing CG, but now we look back and it's like, wow, they actually use significantly less CGI in those movies, with maybe the exception of Attack of the Clones. They use significantly less CG than most movies, and especially superhero movies, do now.
I do think that's also a sign of the times, though, too. You have to understand that was 20 years ago.
Right. But for me, it's an unfortunate trend because, like you said, I mean, Force Awakens, problems with the trilogy aside, Force Awakens looks pretty good because it has a lot more sets than the next two.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing, right? I think people are more forgiving on CGI props and CGI characters than they are on CGI environments and CGI sets.
Well, let's go back to The Force Awakens again. What's the one scene everyone doesn't like? The scene with the Rattars, because they're a bunch of CGI blob monsters that just don't seem to fit with the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. But when that's true, though, I guess with this movie, if everything's CGI, then nothing really, I guess, stands out because it's all kind of...
I was just going to say, then that's an issue with consistency, because if that was people's complaint with Force Awakens, it's because it didn't look right with the rest, but it is looking all CGI.
I mean, that's a good point. If you're going to go practical, go practical. If you're going to go full CGI, go full CGI.
But I think for the problem, one of the other problems with me is like, it's almost like he's going for, hey, be wowed at this with like you said, the splash panel style thing, or like the epic style establishing shots, but it's fake. So I don't get any like astonishment. And I'm like, oh, so you rendered this. That's cool.
It's essentially him trying to make a live action cartoon. He's trying to set it in a comic world or a cartoon world with these characters where the characters are actually real humans, and it just doesn't look right.
Especially, go ahead, Geoff.
That was the point I was actually just going to make. Is like, is that Snyder's idea behind this? Is like, this is a comic book movie, so we're going to make it like a comic book. Is this an art piece? Instead of like a physical set.
Well, that's a good point. That seems to be how Snyder's been making these movies ever since Man of Steel. Is he wants and I think it's a fallacy that he's found, is trying to make, even back since Watchmen, of trying to make the movies exactly like the comic books. You can't do that. Like, that was, like, I think Watchmen's a beautiful movie, but he's focused so much on just copying the book that the story was lost. And you see that with this movie, too. You have Superman in the black suit, which serves no narrative purpose. It's just there because that's what he wore in the comic. At the very end, we get a cameo by the Dark Knight Returns Batmobile tank thing, which, again, is only there so we can go, see? He has that vehicle. Like, he's just pulling stuff from the comics.
Instantly.
Well, the other point to make to that too, though, is you look at, I mean, you know, people like to use Watchmen as an example, but I think people also forget that 300 was, his telling of that was also based on the 300 graphic novel, the Frank Miller one, right? Because 300 was an actual thing, right? That actually happened, but we didn't get that version of it. We got the graphic novel version of it. So is that just Zack Snyder's desire and his strength?
I think that's a strength of a DP. I don't think that's good for a director to focus entirely on that. I think it's good for a DP to maybe look at the comic panels for inspiration, but when you have a director who's directing a movie in still images, basically, that seems to be almost what he's doing. I think it does affect the story.
One thing is, he's kind of, you know, we've talked about, and it is true that 300 is heavily CGI, but like it works somehow. Like, he's kind of applied 300 because 300 was a big hit and said, okay, I'm going to do that for everything.
Well, I think the problem is 300 is its own movie, and when he started with Man of Steel, it didn't look like this, and he slowly made it look like it is now.
Well, especially like his direction style. His direction style of the slow-mo action scene, which seems to be in every movie. 300 has the slow-mo kicks. Watchmen has the slow-mo punches. Even that freaking owl movie. I watched Legends of Guardians of Ga'Hoole right before we recorded this. That even has the CGI owls doing like the slow-mo punches and kicks and stuff. Like, it's in everything he does. And I think it works really well with 300. I think it sort of works with Watchmen. I don't know if it always works, especially with this movie, because someone did the math.
Certainly not this long.
Because someone did the math on this movie, and 10% of Zack Snyder's Justice League is in slow motion.
Which, if you want to do more math, is about 24 minutes, and that's not include. So that's the total runtime that's in slow motion. You could shave even more off depending on how slow the slow motion is, because this has about 3 or 4 different speeds of slow motion.
Well, and that's the other problem, is he overuses it, and when you use it with a character like Flash, who you're showing that he's super fast, you're like, what's his power? Is he fast because like you slowed down everyone else at some point or another? It's like, how am I supposed to know? If I didn't know Flash was a speedster, how would I know?
Or sped up Wonder Woman. Whatever the hell that was. Flying around like a little,
she was Wonder Flash.
Nightcrawler.
I actually think a really good example of that is what's the character in Marvel? Quicksilver?
Yeah, Quicksilver.
Yeah. Evan Peters is Quicksilver. That scene was a great example of how to use slow-mo and also using like a warped sense of speed. I think that was actually a really great example of how to do that properly.
Which I feel like is what he tried to copy in this, but made it like super melodramatic and like weird.
And he succeeds somewhat in this movie, but it's hard to tell when you have Lois Lane walking in slow motion with a cough. It's like.
So Jeff, you bring up Evan Peters. Does that mean that you don't think that this is a good use of CGI with those flash scenes?
It's not that I don't think this is. It's not that I don't think this is a good use of it. I just think that was like a perfect example of it.
Okay, fair point.
That was a really good example of how to use it. It's not that this is overdone. I think this is just. I mean, this is very characteristic of Snyder's style. So, you know, he's noted The Matrix as like one of his biggest influences. And it's in everything he does. I mean,
I think he just draws it out too much.
And I get people's complaints with that, and you know, I understand. This movie is literally everything Zack Snyder does. I mean, this is just, there's slow-mo, long intros, tons of exposition.
It's very self-indulgent.
Movies.
It's definitely a Snyder movie.
It's definitely a Snyder movie.
And that's something I want to say too before we keep going, because I know we're kind of crapping on his style a lot, but I do want to say that I do heavily respect Zack Snyder. I think he's a really class act person. People seem to just love working with him. I think that's partially why. I mean, you look at his filmography. Most of his movies haven't made very much money, but yet he keeps getting these really big, high-profile jobs. And I think part of it is because he's just a super good person. People like working with him. He handled this situation with grace.
Yes.
Even though this is like a filmmaker's nightmare.
And we might be ragging on him, but I mean, I'm one of the few who actually love Man of Steel. I mean, I like Watchmen and I like 300. It's like, I don't hate the guy. Just he does things where he uses all what he loves to do a little too much sometimes.
Yeah, I feel I used to I like a lot of his older stuff, but I feel like it's like the thing in a sitcom where like they eventually become caricatures of themselves. Like we said, this is like the most Snyder movie Snyder has ever made. Like he's gone so far down the rabbit hole. I feel like versus like Dawn of the Dead is almost like unrecognizable as a Snyder movie.
I think it's partially why people, because the fan response to this cut has been extremely high. I think that's partially why this is Zack Snyder at peak Zack Snyder, and that's what a lot of these people missed from the first one. It's what they wanted this movie to be, and now they finally get it.
Or at least it's more consistent.
True.
I think that's the one thing, and I understand that there's some people who are still not big fans of this, but you look at some of the recent, I guess I'll call it issues that Warner Brothers has had especially with DC movies, and this is kind of trying to get rid of them. I mean, you look at things like the Whedon cut of this, and you look at Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad is a great example. I think Warner Brothers has a tendency to overthink their movies, and so to have a movie finally be consistent in its form, even if it's maybe not the cinematic masterpiece, it's still it's at least consistent, because I think Suicide Squad is a wonderful example of Warner Brother meddling with movies.
I don't want to start a fight about this, but I do want to say this. I don't like what Warner Brothers has been doing. I think how they treated Zack Snyder, you potentially using his daughter's death to axe him from a movie, I think is super scummy. That said, because people have been debating online since the movie came out, what's better, the Whedon cut, the Snyder cut, which is better, which is a better experience? In my honest opinion, none of that is relevant. I think when you look at this movie from a strictly business perspective, not quality-wise, take quality completely out of it, Zack Snyder's Justice League, from a traditional theatrical standpoint, is unreleasable. It's 4 hours. It's in 4:3. I mean, I can't imagine what the studio execs thought when they got a hold of this movie.
He said he shot it in IMAX. That's not what we meant.
He said it was only going to be 2 hours and 30 minutes. What the hell?
And part of it's their fault giving him. Because they basically, I mean, right? They gave him complete free control and then took it away last minute, like that. Again, that's not cool of them.
That's very WB and DC. Is they are very reactionary. Oh, people loved it. Let's give them all the power. People hated that one. Let's nix his power.
Mm-hmm. But that said, I think this movie is doing really well now. I mean, the rating, the viewership numbers aren't the greatest. I don't think it's where they wanted them to be right now, but it's doing pretty well. However, I think if this would have released in theaters when it was supposed to, it would have been a massive dud.
Oh yeah.
Well, does that point to a very interesting trend in the industry, though? And I know COVID has changed a lot of shit, but you think of a lot of the content that has come out in the last year, and the Parks and Rec get together episode, right, where they all just talk over Zoom, right? That's something that never would have flown, 2 years ago.
That was so bad, though.
Right? People, it was terrible. It was terrible. Not going to deny that. But 2 years ago, they wouldn't have even agreed to it. They'd have been like, yeah, no, that's not.
Well, that's because they were busy. No one was filming anything at the time. That's why they got to do it. Like, oh, we're bored. Let's do this because our productions are on hold until we figure this COVID thing out.
Well, but I mean that aside, I mean people. I guess I mean what I'm getting at is that people are becoming okay with odd media styles, right? People are becoming very okay with things not being traditional, right? People are okay with, going back to weird aspect ratios and things that are shot in weird, things that wouldn't have been okay a couple of years ago.
It's still not okay in my opinion. to shoot
Same. But that's why. But he does raise a point: is people are desperate for media and they'll take anything they can get.
Do we know, was this movie greenlit before COVID or after COVID started?
I believe before.
Yeah, I think so, because I think they were already.
Because they were shooting scenes prior to COVID, I believe, and I think they finished right before.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think going back to the different things in weird ratios and all that, I feel like it's becoming more accepted when it has a purpose, if you know what I mean, like when it's motivated. Like people love The Lighthouse, that was in 4:3 for a very specific reason, to get that claustrophobic feel. And this, a lot of these things feel unmotivated. Like, why is this scene slow-mo? I don't know. Why is the coffee cup thing slow-mo? Because. Why is it in 4:3? Good question.
But I also think this movie has hype because it has this, right? Like this movie is in some ways like the GameStop stock of the film world, where the film people see getting this movie released as a win against the studio, right? It's a win for the fans. It's a loss for the studio. Like, we're getting what we want. Whether it's good or not is irrelevant. We're getting what we want.
And that could be very dangerous.
Release the Palpy cut.
Well, that's the thing, is now you're getting everyone release this cut, release that cut. I want to see this version. It's like, and now it's going to be up to the studios to whether they want to bend the knee and do it for the other ones.
I just really want to see the cut of Jar Jar Binks as the Sith Lord.
Yes.
Do it. Are you guys forgetting #release the butthole cut?
No, right.
That's the best one.
That's the cut.
But I think that is one thing that can come well out of it, because on the one hand, right, for me, this is an example of this needed to be cut. That's why this cut wasn't out, and it has issues. There are other ones, like even BVS, where they cut the movie out of the movie, or literally every Ridley Scott movie that isn't Gladiator or Alien, when the studio's we're just gonna shit all over your original cut. Those ones getting pushed to maybe be the one that's released first. Kingdom of Heaven got butchered. We all know Blade Runner. And there's even more examples. Or one, I just saw an article a couple days ago saying, everybody's talking about the Snyder cut. Here's one that would have been a masterpiece if it was released as it was. And in reality, it was one of the biggest bombs ever, which was Heaven's Gate, the Michael Cimino movie that literally killed a whole era of filmmaking. And a lot of that was his own fault, going over budget, over schedule, all of that. But it says it was one of the most critically panned movies ever. And now that the director's cut is out, it's considered amazing.
So I guess
I think it could be a push of the director's cut's being the theatrical cut. Maybe.
But does this movie have to be successful for that to happen, though?
Yes, I think so. That's the other thing. I feel like this. Otherwise, it'll be an excuse to do the opposite again and be we're just gonna keep, because studios have a ton of power right now to be we're gonna keep our power.
And that's an interesting point.
And unfortunately, this is the one that's staked on.
Yeah, it's true. But this is a very high-profile one, right? You've heard nonstop. Didn't they fly a banner over some movie premiere, with an airplane saying release the Snyder cut?
I think so. Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe you're right.
Honestly, I can't tell what happened and what was an Onion article anymore, but I think that one was real.
They were wild trying to get this movie out.
Yeah.
And I have to commend them for that. It takes I mean, you have to really, really care. And even Snyder, I think, was really impressed with his fans. I mean, and these fans also raised tons of money for mental health awareness and mental health research in honor of his daughter. And I think that was a cool thing. Some people took it too far and were basically harassing execs to get this movie out. That's obviously not okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that raises another problem is if a movie comes out and it's not good, people are just going to be like, oh, we'll release the director's cut, blah, 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 and then start harassing studios again. And I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm only defending the studios. I'm in favor of the director's vision and everything, but sometimes the studio's right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing people have to remember, too, is that filmmaking is a business. It's an art form, but it's also a business. And Snyder was playing with so much house money that they were going to keep an eye on it. And I don't think necessarily what Whedon did was the best solution. But there's some key points to look at, right? So one of the big things with the Snyder Cut is that several characters were cut out of it later on. And these include Willem Dafoe as Vulko, who we later see in Aquaman, and Kiersey Clemons as Iris West, who we'll probably never see again. Who's probably never going to be in another movie. So before I move on to the other characters, so Jeff, Justin, we saw the theatrical cut. Does the lack of these characters in that movie and then putting them back in, does their presence actually add anything? I guess, Alex, I think you can add. You can add to this too, but does bringing these characters back actually improve the movie at all?
No, I mean, only one I could say probably would be Iris West, because we see Barry Allen applying for a job and trying to get a job at that point. So it kind of adds a little more character to him. The one with Aquaman, you really didn't need because you got it later with British Mara.
Amber Heard.
Yeah, I was just gonna say she has a random accent, like. But yeah,
that's a character. That's a character we're gonna see axed soon.
Cough, cough. Careful, she'll cut your fingers off.
Yeah, I was gonna say, watch your fingers.
We should probably get off of this line of discussion.
As someone who hasn't seen the theatrical, as just like, do they contribute to the movie? No, I didn't think so.
Their contribution is all subplot, right? It's all exposition, which we know Zack Snyder is big on, right? Does it matter that Barry got a job at the end and he's showing his dad problem? We don't really need to see that, but
I do think it shows some arrogance on his part, because all of this stuff is set up for other movies that he's not making. Yeah, I think that's kind of strange.
I wouldn't necessarily say that's arrogance, though.
I think it is
setting up other directors.
I don't think it's arrogance on his part. I think it's arrogance on WB's part.
That I might agree with you.
To set up other movies that you have no idea if they're coming out, and guess what? They aren't.
Or eventually. Who knows?
Now, the other big character that was cut from this movie and brought back is Darkseid. He was supposed to be the big bad of Justice League 2 and 3 that we're probably not going to see. His scenes were cut, or in some cases replaced by Steppenwolf, who is the villain in this one. Does him being in this add anything, or is it just fluff for future films?
I believe it does, because it shows that this isn't the big bad this isn't Thanos, because in the theatrical cut it was just Steppenwolf. It shows that this isn't Thanos right away in the beginnings of this cinematic universe.
I could to me, their contributions were so small, and they weren't differentiated as characters, both in terms of development, but also visually they look the same. They're CG creatures that I'm all right, there's that one, and which one's that one? I couldn't differentiate them.
It wasn't an issue I had. I thought they all kind of looked very similar.
Yeah, it's okay, so he's supposed to be the boss of Steppenwolf. Okay, but why?
Well, again, here, use mocap. I think these were all just animated figures.
Yeah, I think
no one was doing because Darkseid's walking back to his throne, and it looks like he's walking with a stick up his ass.
It was cool seeing him in action in that intro scene rather than Steppenwolf, which that scene was pretty stupid. Just only because you have the shot of Robin Wright, who is very clearly not played by Robin Wright. It's very clear her face on someone else.
Are you fucking kidding me?
And the guy who played Ares is CGI'd on other guy's body.
Well, because David Thewlis isn't that jacked.
Exactly, or that young.
like that's not the case.
I will say, I think this is a case of DC trying to take from Marvel. I mean, because this whole Steppenwolf and Darkseid kind of reminds me of Ronan and Thanos, you know. Mm-hmm. And then there was the one character who we saw in the the melted metal, and that reminded me of the witch that we saw, or the warlock, or whatever you want to call him in Avengers. And so I think bringing Darkseid back, even if it doesn't guarantee the release of a second or third Justice League, I understand the point of it, and I understand, you know, especially we were talking about, you know, film. I mean, being an art, but it's also a business, and you're trying to set yourself up.
I believe that's why they changed him to Steppenwolf in that scene, is so that they're like, oh, well, he's not doing the next Justice League movie, so we're going to get rid of that.
I do think it adds some scale. I do think it establishes that there are other threats out there, and I do like that. I wish, if they're going to include him, I wish they added more of him to make it seem like it was a little bit more worthwhile. But on the other hand...
Instead of him getting his butt kicked by Atlanteans, Amazons, and gods.
Yeah, but I mean, he's supposed to be like a younger, not as seasoned conqueror.
True.
So I guess that's probably their explanation. Is kind of not a great one, but
it could have been a better. Let's put it this way: it could have been a better fight, because all of a sudden he's kicking ass, and all of a sudden he's losing.
I also think my issue with it being him and not Steppenwolf is that he's barely a part of this movie, and then we get no background or info on the actual villain of this movie.
That's a good point. We do get some. It's just super vague. It's like in one sentence of dialogue that he betrayed Darkseid at some point, and we never actually see that.
Fuck, show me that instead. It's like that's more interesting than anything else they talk about in their Zoom room where they just talk.
I'm a huge New Gods fan. They are making a New Gods movie that I'm sure will have nothing to do with this. So we'll see Darkseid eventually. Probably, unless Ava DuVernay is in movie jail for making Wrinkle in Time. Otherwise, we'll see him eventually. The other big addition of character-wise is finally the confirmation that Martian Manhunter was the general dude. His name I forget. He was a background character.
That is part of the problem. What was his name?
I think it was cool to know that Martian Manhunter was there the whole time. I think he looked really bad.
I think him showing up the way he showed up was kind of weird.
Yeah, like what? Why?
Why did he disguise himself as Ma Kent to talk to Lois?
Because isn't Lois gonna then talk to Martha Kent and be like, "Hey, it was good seeing you the other day." She's gonna be like, "What?
What?"
That was one of the two scenes in the movie that really stuck out to me as odd and felt like kind of a toss at fan service. Adding him, and one of my least favorite scene in the entire movie is the scene with.
I know what you're going to say.
And the Joker.
I know what you're going to say. Let's save that for a little bit. Because that's a big point.
A little reach around.
That.
Oh my God.
That we need to talk about.
Right.
But I'm going to hold off until give that its own segment. Kind of stay.
Okay. It's got its own. Okay.
Because that we got to talk about. But sticking with this kind of quick kind of time about like the changes, right? The Snyder stuff versus the Whedon stuff. I'm gonna go back to a second point I had when we talked about the visual look that I never got to actually ask. So I have a second question, which is the visual changes, right? Because all the CGI looks different from the theatrical cut. Do you think the visual changes actually worked? Because
yes, just being more consistent and not being a red sky for some reason.
Yeah, I don't think it looks good. I mean, it's consistent with the other, stuff. I think it looks kind of pukey, but it's not like
it's a little dark.
Consistent.
Geoff?
Mostly, most of my problem is probably just the CG. That's what makes it look pukey.
Yeah, I at least appreciated the consistency of it. David, I know you and I have talked about it a little bit, just kind of in our own conversations. And I think some of Snyder's visual style works very well for things like Batman.
And we're on the topic of Snyder, though, stuff. I really want to talk about for just a little bit the action sequences in this movie. Specifically some of them. Like, the one that sticks out to me is Steppenwolf's arrival as just being this super weird kind of like out of place sequence with the Amazons. But I think that scene brings, which I think is my core issue with a lot of the action sequences that have heavy use of CGI. You have CGI parademons, you have CGI horses. My favorite part is when a Queen Hippolyta is running away in slow motion, but the rocks behind her are following in real time. That's super bizarre to me. Bad. But what did other people think about the action sequences?
Too CGI heavy. Again, it's with other like Marvel movies. It's cut to hell. You don't really get a good wide shot of everything going on. It's all close-ups.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember. Like, to me, there was not like a single memorable action moment besides the one that was for the wrong reasons, the Wonder Woman one where she's kind of zooming around.
That was so weird. That was so weird.
But yeah, they were just, it's a weird combo of like, they had all this unnecessary slow-mo, but at the same time the action scenes were like too fast. Like almost nothing happens. They beat a couple people up, and that's the end. Like the climax was very like, that's it? Like that's the end?
I know we keep harping on this point, but I think it stands true to what we were saying earlier. This movie really is like a Zack Snyder self-indulgent wet dream, which is okay. But I do, it's not like, because I think one of my favorite comic fight scenes is actually in Aquaman. That underwater battle that they had was, that stands out. That really stood out to me, and I didn't feel like there was anything in this movie. I did like where they were riding, Batman was riding around in the Batmobile, fighting off the parademons. I thought that was all right.
How did you think about the Atlantis fight scenes in this movie compared to the ones in Aquaman? That good, huh?
Yeah. Speechless. No, it's tough. I understand that, you look at Zack Snyder's style, and it's, again, we talked about The Matrix a little earlier, and The Matrix is, for him, was such an influence. But I think the type of fights that happen in The Matrix are relevant to The Matrix, right? It's about like Neo and the agent. And so to have two people fighting in slow-mo is okay, but when you come to an action scene with hundreds of parademons and 6 superheroes fighting around, it becomes hard to make a grandiose fight scene out of that much slow-mo. And I'm not saying that to trash talk it. I'm just.
He's also, to me, honestly changed how he does slow mo. Because think about 300. It's very like Matrix slow. It's very like quick slow mo for part of a punch or for part of a swing to highlight something. Like you think about Matrix, they go up in the air and then it spins around, like stopped in motion and then continues. Or like they jump off this thing. For this, it almost feels like the whole thing is in slow mo.
That's actually a really good point too. And 300 is a great example of that, where the start of a punch is slow mode, and then all of a sudden, then you get the full speed punch.
Because 300 has a lot that's in fast motion, but then it slows it down in the chaos to show you something specific.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, this seemed super unmotivated to me. It seemed like he did slow motion just because he could. In a lot of these fights, and honestly, this movie too. Like, I thought that Batman getting his ass kicked by a single parademon was a Joss Whedon thing, but that's But that was a Zack Snyder thing, and that shocked me because Zack Snyder, even in BVS and all the issues I had with it, he did Batman pretty good. Batman was the best part of that movie.
I was a fan of his murdery Batman. It was fun.
But Batman,
that was the only thing I didn't like about him was he was murdery.
But Batman might be the worst part to me of this movie.
Good, like Dark Knight Returns-y thing.
That was he really liked Dark Knight Returns. Clearly, that was a movie he wanted to make instead of BVS, and BVS was a movie he had to make.
Yeah.
But we don't see that kind of Batman in Justice League. He's kind of lame.
We don't see Batman in Justice League. I don't very long.
Well, I don't get it because people are like, well, he's just a guy in a bat suit. What could he do against these? I'm like, well, fucking Hawkeye is just a guy with an arrow, and he was taking out at least the minions in Avengers. It's like, why are we treating Batman like he's Hawkeye? Less than Hawkeye.
And he's got guns and stuff and
mech suits,
all kinds of gadgets, and he can punch people really, really hard.
And I think that's
what's your superpower, Rich?
I'm rich.
That was the one. Like, honestly, like, to me, no other jokes landed, but that one made me laugh. I did like that.
And that's
because it's true.
And that's a big thing too with this movie that I think is kind of a good point to move on to is the characters and the acting compared to the Whedon version specifically. Which, like, my biggest issue with that was that Gal Gadot went from knowing how to play Wonder Woman almost perfectly to not being able to act at all, and Ben Affleck looked like he just wanted to jump off a bridge the entire time.
The meme came from.
And they seem to be enjoying a lot more than this time. Like, they seem to actually having a good time.
Well, it depends on who's directing you, and you're having fun on set.
The acting
I will say
great.
that's something I felt like I noticed.
Like, Ray Fisher literally can't act, but, like, some of them did well.
Ray Fisher. Okay, let's talk about Ray Fisher for a second, because he's been in the news going against Warner Brothers, talking smack about Joss Whedon, making some pretty serious allegations about racism on set. That basically has cost him a future in the DCEU. I gotta commend him with that. In my opinion, he's not good in this movie. He's not good.
No, he's really bad.
No. But I also chalk that up to this guy's usually a stage actor, and now he's going to a green screen where he has to react to things that aren't there.
Somewhere over there is Steppenwolf. Okay.
as he punches something, and then, like, weird wailing music plays every time someone punches anybody. I love Junkie XL. I'm glad they replaced Danny Elfman with him on this because I love him. But this might be the worst soundtrack I've ever heard him make. It's not great in my opinion. Like I was hoping for Mad Max Fury Road, drums pounding, that kind of shit. Nope, just weird angelic singing.
I was really hoping we got some kind of like a Thor Ragnarok type of soundtrack.
Yeah, see, right. And that's what it should be.
Going back to your earlier point, though, I think that was one of the things that I think really contrasted in the Whedon reshoots is you can't tell me that Ezra Miller thinks Joss Whedon's jokes are like, having watched the Whedon cut, like the delivery on some of those, man, like.
I don't think he thought these jokes were funny.
I was going to say,
I don't think he thought
that funny either.
But it at least felt like the performances were more consistent, and I think that matters, right?
I think the only person to me that doesn't feel like they're having a good time on this one is Henry Cavill, and maybe Amy Adams too.
I'd rather be doing Mission Impossible.
I don't know if you want Tom Cruise on that set.
No, what he wants is to have his own movie again.
That's a good
point. And to be in movies longer than just like 20 minutes.
They made too much fun doing Witcher.
That's true. He's become like a geek god. And
yeah, he really has. I think The Witcher was a huge sell for him.
It was because he can act. I mean, Mission Impossible, Fallout, The Witcher, dude's good. I think he just hates the material he's given.
Until I saw those. It's like, oh, he is good.
I mean, Justice League should be. I think one of the biggest mistakes Justice League made was relegating Superman into a supporting character. He's Superman in Justice League.
He's
supposed to be like coming back from the dead, you know.
Well, the problem is they let Snyder kill him.
Yeah, they should not have done that.
Yeah, good.
And then the other problem is Snyder doesn't know what he did in his last movie, because all of a sudden in this movie he's like, because the last movie we saw the ground shaking on top of the tomb. You're like, oh, he's just gonna regenerate himself like he does in the comics and everything. Nope, we have to somehow use the Speed Force and the Mother Box to bring him back, which I thought was a Whedon thing. But then watching this movie, I'm like, this is Snyder's thing still too. I was like, man, he did not watch his own movie.
I think that was the most shocking thing to me watching this, was how much that I thought was Whedon stuff was actually Snyder stuff.
Yeah,
that kind of blew me away.
It was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to see some of the actors not having a good time, not doing well. Like Cyborg probably should have maybe cast a younger actor, or had him have more energy stuff, because it kind of made him super somber and gloomy and
He's
sad.
just a sad boy.
He's supposed to be the fun guy. He's supposed to be like, booyah, let's get pizza.
Yeah, he's supposed to be the fun one. He's the young one, right? He's supposed to be the young one who's like the kid, and they kind of made that the Flash.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Or it seems like they tried to.
And this is kind of my problem with with the New 52 in general, was just them going with Cyborg in the Justice League rather than the Teen Titans.
At least he wasn't sad boy Cyborg.
One part of that too might just come through. I mean, I'm sure, obviously, like I'm not talking about a script wise, but performance wise, part of that might have just been on Ray Fisher and Ezra Miller themselves. You know, if you're looking at their careers.
And I think that's a good point. But also, I think I believe it's Snyder, and only that he likes doing somber stuff with DC. It's kind of what he's been doing. Oh, it makes sense. I do think that the scene where Cyborg gives that one random woman a bunch of money was really stupid.
I'm going to cause you so much issues, but yeah.
And now that brings me to the point I wanted to save kind of for the end. The big thing that they reshot is the ending nightmare sequence. I think it's one of the more controversial parts. Jeff, you alluded to it earlier as the one thing you really didn't like. What didn't you like about it?
Well, I think if you look at some of the nightmare sequences that we got in Batman vs. Superman, it still felt important and felt relevant. And this just felt like a kind of a fan service type of toss into me. It just felt like so out of place to me.
I think you're exactly right.
You don't want to get jacked off by the Joker? It's awfully homophobic.
I don't want to know where
and don't get me wrong, dude. I was like, excited to see Deathstroke and shit. I think that's cool. I'm not super sold on Leto's performance of the Joker just as a whole. But it felt, and I know that Snyder likes his exposition and to like add a whole bunch of extra stuff, and I'm okay with that. But this really felt just out of place to me.
It was shot last minute for this specific release, and it really does feel that way.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think, going back to the nightmare scenes in BVS, which at the time, and I shared this complaint, felt like it served no purpose. And then it's like, okay, here we go. Last 20 minutes of the Snyder Cut. Is there going to be a purpose for it? No, not really.
Nope.
It's still just random. It's still just a dream. And, at this point we've seen, in both movies, how many minutes of nightmare scenes have we seen now, right? Like how many minutes of the sequence have we seen and don't really have a purpose for, besides Jared Leto saying some weird things and doing his bad laugh again? And he didn't say, we live in a society. I waited 4 hours to see the meme, and I didn't get it.
Apparently he ad-libbed it. Well, no shit.
Yeah, no. You tell me they didn't actually write that? Honestly, I kind of believe that they wrote that for a second.
Yeah,
so did I.
With that.
And I think it shows how much it was poorly thought out, because the Flash is in that sequence, but yet the Flash doesn't actually have any dialogue in that sequence. So I feel like they took Flash's part and made it the Joker. Because it's very obvious, I think, in that scene specifically, to determine what was shot like 6 months ago just for this release and what was shot 4 years ago. Because like Ben Affleck changes weight during different shots, which was a big issue.
Leto obviously needed a haircut post Suicide Squad.
Well, that's the issue I had with the theatrical cut too. What was that? You would cut in the same scene shots from the Whedon version and the Snyder version in the same scene, like the hair would change. It's just super bizarre, and you see that in that sequence too. I think it was a way. And I think the big thing to take away from that scene specifically is I think because we saw that scene, because we saw the Joker in it, I think that's them confirming we're not going to see any more Jared Leto Joker. I think Snyder even alluded that him and Batman never got a big scene together, and that's why he put it in there.
So they still haven't had a big scene together.
Yeah. I'd say thank God, but I don't know. There's not a lot to work with Jared Leto's Joker to see what could have been.
It's real. What we've seen is pretty rough.
It was weird still dialogue. He kind of had like some Tommy Wiseau vibes. It's a big. It's. I like the nightmare stuff. I like the dystopian Batman shit. I wish they would do more with it or stop putting it in every movie. Because again, this movie has two teases. Because it has the tease to Ben Affleck's Batman movie, which isn't coming out, and it has the tease to Justice League 2, which isn't coming out. And I think that's kind of a disappointment. One final point that I want to talk about before we kind of get into closing arguments and closing talk. So this movie is over 4 hours long. The theatrical cut is exactly 2 hours long. Was the extra length worth it?
No.
Having watched both cuts, I'm going to say yes to a degree.
What's that degree?
Like the scene that we just talked about. You really didn't need that, right? And there's a lot of exposition. I was talking earlier about Barry showing his dad, that he had gotten a job, and all this exposition stuff. I understand that Snyder likes to self-indulge in a lot of exposition. And I think that's fine to a degree because I think details like that are important, especially for something that you want to make into an epic, I'm not looking for an hour and a half or 2 hour cut. I'll sit through a 3 hour movie, but a 4 hour movie is a little bit much to sit through. And that's my only point, right? I'll sit through something. You look at Blade Runner 2049 is a great example. That's almost 3 hours, right? But I would sit through that, right? Because there's, a lot of great content to it. And so I think you can make something, worthwhile in a format that long. But I think 4 hours is, you made a great point that theatrically this is not selling. No one's going to sit in a movie theater for 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the big problem, as we talked about, is there seems to be a lot of repetition throughout this 4 hour movie. That he explains things twice, and it's like you don't need to say that twice.
And it throws off the pacing because, I feel like I'm the one who loves long movies the most out of us. Like, I'll sit through a 3.5 hour epic. I don't give a shit. Oh. But structurally, this falls so far behind those where it's like, Godfather, 40 minutes in, Vito shot, stuff gets moving. This 40 minutes in, okay, the villains have showed up now. Ignore them for the next 40 minutes while we do more Act 1 stuff. Like it's kind of all over the place. And
Batman doesn't show up until an hour into the film.
And it's like, because it's everything they shot. Well, a lot of it, like you said, should have been cut.
Well, Bruce Wayne does. Batman doesn't show up till 2 hours in. It's insane.
Being a self-proclaimed Snyder superfan, I obviously love agonizingly long movies. Right? But but to that point, I know I'm putting a match to gasoline. I would rather have something like that than something like we got in Rise of Skywalker, where somehow Palpatine returned, right?
Yes, well, I would agree.
That is my counterpoint to that. So is 4 hours necessary? Well, maybe not. But if you're going to make something like this, I would 100% rather have you over-explain something to me than to give me nothing.
But I also somehow feel like he explained some things over and over again, and then some things really weren't. Mm-hmm. So it's like I feel like how I weirdly feel like simultaneously he over-explained, and it's like, oh, so he thinks I'm stupid, but then other times it's like, wait, who is this person? Wait, why is Steppenwolf doing stuff? Wait, who is he? Like,
who is this melted monstrosity he's talking to?
Yeah, so it's a weird, he didn't balance it very well.
I guess for me, my big issue with it being 4 hours is the fact that I don't think it added extra 2 hours of relevant story. I think that the Whedon cut told the same exact story in half the time. Like almost literally, like there's the same number of action sequences in the Whedon cut. It's the same length of action. So all we're getting is extra story, extra exposition, but I don't think it actually adds much to it. But I also feel like had this been released theatrically, that would not have been the version we saw in theaters. It would not have been that 4-hour cut. It would have been probably closer to 3.
Yeah. To be fair, some of the action scenes were like a tad bit longer, like a minute or 2 at most.
Not to make it worth it, though.
No.
And I think you said isn't the final one actually shorter?
I think it might be. I honestly think it might be. But
that's because you take away the Russian family.
Yeah, that's why it's longer. It's longer because of the random Russian family that adds nothing to it.
You just get a scene where Barry's rescuing this family and Superman's carrying a apartment building full of people.
Mm-hmm. But Superman,
I feel like when you, especially when you make a movie this long, this type, you're like waiting for the final big confrontation. It's got to be big in some way, in like stakes or in scale. Because like, you know, another classic epic that's super long, everybody loves to watch, even though it's super long, Lord of the Rings, right? Like Fellowship, the ending is awesome, even though it's not super long and super big. It's just really tense and important. Two Towers, I mean, and Return of the King, we all know those ones are huge. Like, and this was like, oh, okay, it's over now.
But I think part of that was the mistake of making this with sequels in mind, instead of making this as one movie. Like, they didn't do what Marvel did, and then they made Avengers one movie and then made a sequel after the fact. They made this intentionally to be the first act of a 3-act structure, and that results in a not very big finale. So I want to hear from you guys now, because now we covered most, I think, of the movie, as most of the big points. So I want to hear your guys' final thoughts. Which I think the big question being, was this worth it? And I guess for me, if you're a Snyder fan, if this is what you wanted, and I think even for just fans get what they want, I think that this is a very important movie just for that. I don't think it's very good. I honestly think it's just as bad as the Whedon version. I don't think it added much of anything. And I think it replaced the problems it solved with the Whedon version with new problems. Like, yeah, it's consistent, but I don't think it's consistently good. And I wish it was better. I wish it was more epic. I wish it was more different, I think, is the big problem. It's just longer. And it's inconveniently long.
I guess for me, I mean, obviously I know I'm a big fan. I think this movie, you made a good point. The importance of this is more what it does for the industry, more what it does for the fans than the actual cut itself. But in terms of it being consistently good, I would ask you to go watch the very first Avengers movie and tell me the same.
Well, two bads do not make.
I'm just saying if you're you look at where Avengers is now, right? And Endgame was, I think, by most standards, fantastic. Right?
I mean, it's better than the first one.
But it took them a long time. To get there. And so I think, especially with the issues that they went through with the whole directors changing and Warner Brothers just meddling with their movies in general, and not having a Kevin, Feige to head everything,
to print money.
I understand. I understand.
Well, we did trust Snyder to kind of spearhead it, and then he gave them a 4-hour movie shot like a VHS tape. but I think the important thing is the previous is they went too far too fast, right? Like they put all this pressure on Zack Snyder to launch a universe and basically make him make 5 movies, because he was going to basically go back to back for like 4 or 5 movies.
Yeah, because it was Man vs. Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and then Justice League 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it was supposed to be basically all back to back. And then when BVS did not make as much money as they hoped, because it only made $1 kajillion, not $1 billion kajillion, then all of a sudden, panic mode.
set in. Yeah.
Set in. Alex, Justin, what do you guys think? Was this worth it? Is this a good movie?
By saying that, I definitely am. No. I mean, to me, I've used this quote a few times, but like, I really feel this way, just the way it's paced and structured, and like how much of it's necessary. It's a 4-hour movie that's 3 hours too long. Like, and it feels that way. And I'm someone who loves, sit down and watch a long, great film. I was really struggling, and it's by virtue of Wonder Woman 84, it's not the worst movie DC's put out, but it's not, for me, it's not very far off, and it kind of shows like why the Snyderverse really doesn't exist anymore. Like, I mean, this was kind of like all the problems that had all the problems that had built up in the other ones coming to head in like this very overindulgent, like insane thing that people, now we've seen it, and now it's like, oh, so that's what happened. Justin, go for it.
Basically, I'm with you, David. It's like, I can't say this is any better than the theatrical. What it does fix, it just adds its own problems. And I had so much problems with the first movie. Like, this doesn't fix any of the story problems that I had, and it's just longer and more unevenly paced.
Now you kind of alluded this too, but Geoff, would you call this better than the Whedon cut? I know I'm asking you a question I just said earlier was irrelevant, but I guess.
No, I know, but
is it better? Is this a better movie?
I'm gonna say yes, and not by a huge margin. I know we joked earlier before our call about revoking my Snyder fan card because I didn't give this movie a 10 out of 10. And that said, I do think it was good. I think I rated it like a 7 out of 10. I'm not saying this movie doesn't have its issues, and I'm fully aware of that, but I do think that this was a better movie, at least in terms of performance, not only by the actors, but with a consistency in editing, and maybe not pace-wise, but I guess not having both Whedon and Snyder shots in there.
How do you think this compares to Snyder's other movies?
It's the exact same as all of them.
But like quality-wise, though, we know it's the exact same.
And I say that as a joke, but also like kind of seriously, like very much. I mean, this is Snyder's wet dream. I think Alex made a really good point about that earlier. In that, you look at some of the stuff that is very important to his style and its relevance and stuff like 300. And I know Sucker Punch is like a very hated on movie, and I get that. But I think
no, you don't. Continue. Sorry.
Shouldn't have even brought it up. But I think even that shows uses of his style in maybe a different way than this does. It's very Snyder. You could watch 10 minutes of this movie and go, oh, yeah, this is a Zack Snyder movie.
Well, and that's a good point, because I feel like if you watched this and expected something different, that's kind of on you. Like, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be.
And that's the point I guess I'm trying to make with this is, for Warner Brothers to hire on Zack for 5 movies and expect him to not be Zack Snyder is just, I mean, what you signed up for. You look at all of his movies, and it's not like someone, I really like his movies, but I also understand that his movies aren't very varied stylistically. They look all very similar, right? You know what you're getting. And so for Warner Brothers to sign him on for 5 movies and be like, well, why are you being Zack Snyder? It's like, well,
last time I checked, I was Zack Snyder.
What were you hoping for?
Well, so. I think they were okay with that until they stopped making money. But then that comes back to the point of like with them meddling with their movies, right? Suicide Squad, in my opinion, should have been a home run hit, right? How many people love like the Joker, and how big that should have been, and then really what they did with the reshoots and the inconsistency in the editing, giving it to trailer houses and stuff. I mean, they just they
crumbled their own movie.
Well, I think the big issue with the DC movies,
just need to step back and let their directors do their thing.
I think the big issue with the DC movies is they're making money, they're just not actually making profit, which is ridiculous to me. That you have these movies that you're spending so much on, they're not actually making you money.
Yeah. Again, that's a lot of CGI.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of the problem has been like, as far as trusting their directors, I feel like they're trusting the wrong people. But
that's also kind of on them, though.
It is. It is on them.
If you're hiring someone and you want to trust them with an intellectual property, and then get mad when they don't do whatever you're picturing, that's kind of on you because you hired them, knowing full well what you were going to get.
I think they should have.
Well, their problem is they trusted Zack Snyder to write the story and script. They shouldn't have done that. They should have hired other people to do that.
That's a really good point, I think. Or just had Snyder do a Batman movie, because honestly, that probably could have been pretty good.
I agree on that point.
Depending on what Snyder
doing
got.
Batman. I think Snyder doing a Batman would have been awesome. Just a pure Batman fight. So
Geoff, you have it at a 7 out of 10. I have it at a 3 out of 10 right now. At least according to Letterboxd. I think Alex, you have it the lowest of all of us, which doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I gave it the same score I gave the Whedon cut. I think it's a little bit better, but it's not,
marginally.
Yeah.
Not enough
to give it a higher score.
But with that, I guess I'll have one final question. So now everyone's saying on the social media, hashtag restore the Snyder Cut, hashtag bring it back. There's all these rumors every day about, is HBO Max going to do Justice League 2, or they're going to do Ben Affleck's Batman movie? I guess the big question is, should they bring it back? Do you want to see more of this? Do you want to see them do a sequel? Do you think they will do a sequel?
No. And hopefully they don't bring it back.
I think if we get a Justice League 2, this is not going to be like Avengers where they're just pumping them out. This is going to be a couple of years down the road that we're going to see a Justice League 2, and it's going to be something very different.
See, I don't think we'll get a Justice League 2 movie, but I think we'll see the story continued in some form, whether it be an animated movie or a comic book series. I think Snyder will finish his story in some form. He's talked about finishing it as a comic book or something. I think we'll see that.
Comic book wouldn't be too bad.
We already kind of have that because the Batman screenwriter who did the Tim Burton movies is doing a comic book series called Batman 89 that's going to be coming out soon. That it's going to be like kind of the unofficial third Michael Keaton Batman movie. And I think I can see Snyderverse being the big version of that. Alex, what do you think? Do you want to see them come back? I mean, I can guess what your answer probably is.
No.
No. I mean,
I definitely don't.
You aren't curious in any way to see how Snyder's the story some more?
No. I think any curiosity I did have was more than settled within these 4 long hours. I do feel like, it getting finished in some way will happen because, even the Rise of Skywalker script, Duel of the Fates, that did not get made is getting like a comic form or something, isn't it?
Is it? I didn't think so.
I think I thought I saw that.
I hope it does. I'd read the hell out of that.
I think in some form it's getting released. So even things that weren't shot, are getting this happening, or so I feel like this did have its first version come out, its first movie. So in some form he's going to get it done. It wouldn't surprise me again. I didn't expect this cut to come out, so he could somehow a dark sorcery his way into getting Justice League 2. I honestly I will rule nothing out.
It's a fan comic, Alex.
Then we should petition to get Frank Darabont's Indiana Jones script made into a comic or something.
Oh God, I'd read that.
I want to read that because that could be really good.
Or Justice League Mortal, the George Miller Justice League movie.
Yeah, I mean that script is out there, and we totally haven't read it. WB, if you're listening.
I also haven't read the Scooby-Doo one that you've been banning every time it comes up.
We definitely don't have copies of that on our hard drives.
But I do think, because I think there is a market. See, I think HBO Max would have tried to make the future movies before they got folded in with the rest of WB, because now they're owned by the same. Because now they're being run by the same people that stop this one from being released when it was supposed to anyway. But I think HBO Max wants more because I mean it's been successful. It hasn't been Wonder Woman 84 successful, which was pretty successful, but it's still been a success
somehow.
Well, because the fans want it. I mean, the Snyder fans want it. The reception is really high. I think that the reason why it's so high, because Geoff used the scores against me when I said it was unreleasable earlier. But I do think it's because Snyder fans are watching it and they're liking it. Because I've noticed that most movie people, like most casual viewers, couldn't give less of a shit about any of this.
I mean, they're not going to watch a 4-hour cut of a movie they already didn't like, unless they're masochists,
unless they're us.
But I also think, and two, I do feel like some reviews were like trending more negative, and then they do kind of give it points for the fact that it exists,
came out,
like that it came out.
I agree.
But the question is, does that translate into viewership and therefore profit for Max? We'll have, we're not going to know that probably for a few weeks,
or if ever. I'm not sure if we'll ever.
Right, because even then they'll probably lump. If it wasn't successful, they would just lump it in with the increase they'll get from Monkey, from Godzilla vs. Kong, which is going to be quite substantial, I'm sure.
I think looking at the scores, I know a lot of this was watched by Snyder super fans, but if you're looking at, I actually have it pulled up here, both the Rotten Tomatoes and the IMDb pages for Justice League. I mean, across the board, the reviews are far more positive, right? The reviews for Justice League on IMDb, there's almost 200,000 ratings, and Rotten Tomatoes doesn't give me an exact figure, but it's over 25,000. It says.
God,
I'd like to know how many. I'd like to know how many of those are, like Ovidal said, giving
Russian bots.
No, giving it positive reviews because it came out. Like some of the reviews that Tenet was getting were negative because you had to go out during COVID to go see it.
Yeah, like the opposite.
That's right.
So, because for this, I mean, I've read reviews that, especially from big publications, that are trending negative the whole way, and then it's like, but it's a win for the fans. 6 out of 10 counts as positive.
Yeah, I saw it happen a lot with this movie and it's not like that hasn't happened before, right? Not to go and say that this is a rigged Rotten Tomatoes score, because we have no proof of that. But we saw it with Ghostbusters, right? We saw a movie that the fan response was negative on get positive reviews just for existing. Now the fan reviews for this movie have been very high, but I do think it's because the only people that are watching it are Snyder fans. Because like Alex said,
the Letterboxd is lower because there's less Snyder fans on Letterboxd versus IMDb is very much there's a lot of Snyder fans, a lot of Scorsese guys, a lot of Marvel people, a lot that's like the Fincher
Shawshank people somehow.
Yeah, a lot of 90s people, I would say. Letterboxd skews a little younger, I think, and more like film student kind of people. IMDb is very much like 90s because that's when it was most popular. Is I think in the 2000s it was much bigger.
And that's a fair point.
Not to discount
the message boards that they killed.
If you like the movie, not to discount your opinion. If you like the movie, I hope that everyone that wanted to see this movie got what they wanted out of it. I hope they got the movie that they were dreaming of. I got exactly what I expected, but I wasn't really looking forward to what I expected. So,
yeah.
But I think this is a movie too that it seems like people already had their mind made up before they saw it, whether they're gonna like it or not. And I think you saw people's opinions kind of fall in that line. Like if you went in not liking the Justice League movie that we already got, you weren't gonna like this one. And if you went in hopeful, then you would have been fine.
And I think that's an interesting contrast in our viewpoints too. And I know just in general, I tend to be a little easy to please on the side with movies, but I didn't give this a perfect score, but I felt like I got something more out of it than I did watching.
And that's good. I'm glad. Were you part of the campaign at all, Geoff?
I may have signed a signature, yes.
Did they put your name in the credits? Is this like Lord of the Rings fan club thing? Or did they not do that because they should have?
I got a special little paper print off that
He did. Actually, it was amazing. For DC Fandom, the Justice League panel was Zack Snyder asking fans who ran the campaign kind of why they did it. It was actually super sweet. But then Zack Snyder said the movie was gonna be 4 hours long and released as episodes because they couldn't figure out how to make it into a movie yet. And then I started to lose hope at that point. Because it's like, you shot this as a movie 3 years ago.
Yeah.
How do you not know that's a movie?
That's when I realized what I had gotten into. I think was when they didn't know how to make their movie a movie. I was a little like, oh,
what are we in for?
Anyway, with that, we're out of time. We've been talking for a while, and hopefully this is the last time we've talked about this movie ever again. I'm sure it's not, because I don't think we've seen the last of Zack Snyder in the DC universe in some capacity. But I hope I don't have to be a part of it.
He's an executive producer on Suicide Squad 2.
Yeah, but I think that's more because because he signed the greatest deal ever, where he's the EP,
like a 20-year contract,
where he's the EP of all these movies going forward. So he's gonna be laughing all the way to the bank with these movies. But I'd like to thank Geoff Pritzl for joining us today. I hope you don't think that we were too hard on you.
Oh no. I knew full well what I was signing up for, being a Snyder super fan.
Probably fucking worse.
Yeah. So honestly, I'm making out like a champion.
Yeah, I mean, you're surviving this. It wasn't us just bullying you, going, "Ha, Snyder fan."
I thought we were quite tame.
Why don't you go put it in slow-mo, you Snyder fan? Really, you should talk for longer. You only talked for 2 hours instead of 4. You Snyder fan. I gotta get all these in now at the end.
We gotta put this podcast on slow.
Geoff disconnects from the call.
Anyway, thank you, Geoff. Thank you for coming in and bringing a different perspective than we would have given. And for Alex Ovalo and Justin Neitzel, I'm David Yanish. Thank you for listening to Idiot Plot. We're on Spotify. Like us there. Subscribe to us there. Also on Anchor FM and Google Podcasts. We're also on YouTube for audio video. If you're on YouTube, comment. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this movie. I think there's lots of different varying thoughts.
Like, share, subscribe.
Yep. Give us your thoughts. Give us your feedback.
Forget to smash that like button.
Well, anyway, if you want to hear more movie thoughts, go to Letterboxd. Our links are in our social media. We're also on Facebook, so like us there to kind of keep in touch with what we're doing. But thank you for listening to Idiot Plot. We'll see you next time.